Okay, so I was saying that those videos I recorded, it was on this same topic on cost concepts. I think I explained what costs are and why they are important in business. That we need to understand the cost and know the cost, so that when we need to understand the cost, know the cost, and also calculate or ascertain them, so that as we have that information, it will help us to, in terms of setting up the price for the product or the services that we are offering as a business. Then I also explained on the types of the costs. We have variable costs. We have also fixed costs. So these costs, they behave in certain manner. So no wonder they are classified according to their behavior. So others we call them variable costs because they vary with the level of activity or production. So the more units you are producing, when you increase the number of units that you are producing, you expect the cost also to increase. When you reduce, just to also reduce like that. So they are varying within the level of activity. Then we also have the other costs, which are called fixed costs. So these, they don't vary, they are just fixed. They are just fixed. So regardless of the level of activity, whether we increase or we reduce, we still have to pay the same amount. So find, for example, I can give like wages and salaries. At the beginning of the year, you budget to say, we'll pay so much in terms of wages and salaries. It will remain fixed until after 12 months, it will not change. So that is a very good example of a fixed costs, or can also call them overheads, because these, they are always fixed. So regardless of how many units you produce, you still need to pay those. Yeah, then we also discussed on how we can also value the stock of material that we have. For example, if you are in a manufacturing industry business. So we discussed about LIFO, FIFO methods that you can use to value the stock. Yeah, now today we'll look at the cost accounting techniques.
Okay.
Yeah, so these are techniques that we use in costing, or in coming up with the cost. We come up with a cost, and thereafter we'll be able to determine the price, the selling price for the product. So we've got marginal costing. We also have got absorption costing and activity-based costing. Yeah, but the popular ones, the major ones, are the first two: marginal costing and absorption costing. Even in the exam, you are likely to have a question on marginal costing and absorption costing. On activity-based costing, probably to be just an explanation, maybe advantages or just the explanation on how we can also use the activity cost basing as a technique. Yeah, so we can start by looking at marginal costing. So marginal costing is a costing system which treats only the variable manufacturing cost as the product costs. Yeah, so we have product costs. And under product cost, we have two types. There is the prime cost and the conversion cost. Yeah. So under prime cost, that's where we have costs such as the direct material, direct labor, direct expenses. Then under conversion costs, we have the indirect labor and indirect expenses. We can also have direct labor as a conversion cost. Yeah, so here we are saying under marginal costing, we treat variable cost as a product cost. So meaning that here we are just interested in variable costs. If you are using marginal costing, the most important cost in the business, for you to come up with a selling price, to set up a selling price, you are supposed to consider so much the variable costs or the variable manufacturing costs. So these are the one we are calling product costs. Then the fixed manufacturing overheads are regarded as period cost and are reported in the profit and loss as the expenses. So here we don't worry so much about the manufacturing overheads or the fixed costs that we incur in the business. So all these, they are covered as the expenses under profit and loss account. So we charge them to the profit and loss account as the period expenses. And you'll see that this is the difference that is there between absorption costing and marginal costing. Okay, so now we can also look at what is absorption costing. Okay, so for absorption costing, we are saying cost ascertainment, accumulation for individual products and services. So under absorption costing, we consider, first of all, direct costs, just as the marginal costing. So what are direct costs? So these are easily identifiable. Identified to products or services by direct allocation. So we find that these, they are directly attributable to the product that we are producing, or to the product cost, or to the product that we are, or a service that we are producing as an entity or a business. So that's why we call them direct. For example, direct material, direct labor. So the expenses that we incur as we are producing these products that we are manufacturing as a business. So that's why we are calling them. They are identifiable, they are easily identifiable, and they are directly allocated to these products. What about the other ones? We call them indirect costs or overheads. So indirect costs or overheads or fixed costs. So these, we are saying, they are not easy to link, not easy to link them to individual product or service. So you cannot link, for example, the administration expenses that we are paying the support staff, the people that are in supporting the system, the business, the wages and salaries. It is very difficult to attach those expenses to the product. So no wonder we are saying it is not easy to link them to the individual product or a service. No wonder we are calling them indirect costs or overheads. So identification to products done through process of overhead recovery or apportionment or absorption. So the only way we can identify these overheads under marginal cost, under absorption costing is by apportioning or by absorbing them into production costs. That is the only way. So explain, I think there's, as we go down, there's a slide which explains how we can absorb or apportion these overheads into production. That is, if they are affecting the product. So basically, this is the difference that is there between marginal costing and absorption costing. Under marginal costing, we are saying we only worry about variable manufacturing costs. We only worry about direct costs. Those that is the identifiable. Those costs that are directly attributable to the product or services that you are producing. For example, direct material, direct labor, direct expenses. So for marginal costing, those are the only costs that we care about. But under absorption costing, we are saying even in indirect costs or even in fixed costs or overheads are also important here because we have to apportion them or we have to absorb them into production. So basically, this is the difference that is there between the two techniques. So overheads needs to be included in the cost of the product or the service. So what we are just explaining, the process of including the overheads costs to the product is referred to as the overhead absorption or recovery. So we just absorb them into production using this same process, which we are going to learn. Okay, so absorption costing, or you can also call it full costing. Why full costing? Because it encompasses all the costs of the business, including the overheads into production. So allocating all manufacturing costs to products, regardless of whether they are fixed or variable. This is very important. This is what makes the two techniques different. Here, under absorption, we are saying all the manufacturing costs, regardless whether they are fixed or variable, we consider them to be important. Unlike manufacturing, sorry, unlike absorption, marginal costing. Okay. Okay, so we have got this graph, which is also summarizing what we were just explaining. So the costing process. So this is the costing process. So first of all, we have got cost elements. So these are the cost elements: the labor, the material, and the expenses. So all these are considered direct costs. So then they are allocated to the individual product lines in a way of cost units. So we need to know the cost unit, how much one unit requires, how much in terms of labor, how many hours do we need to produce a unit? How much material in terms of maybe in form of kgs or liters do we need in order to produce one unit? So their cost per unit, even in the other expenses like, yeah. So this is how these costs are now allocated to the production. Okay. Then what about the indirect costs? So for indirect costs, you can also call them fixed costs or overheads. So these we allocate them, or we apportion them to the cost centers. So we apportion these to the cost center, or we allocate them. So the cost centers are as follows. So you can have admin costs, selling costs, distribution costs, and cost centers themselves. In order to apportion, we need to come up with the absorption rate that we'll be using to apportion these indirect costs. After we have calculated that cost absorption rate, then we can allocate, or we can absorb those costs into individual product lines. So after we have done that, then we'll put the costs together. Then we are going to have the total costs. So meaning that here now we are going to have the prime cost, which I said the prime cost consists of labor, direct material, and direct expenses. Then we have conversion costs. So conversion costs, direct labor, then we have indirect expenses and other overheads. So when we add all these costs together, then we come up with what we call the total cost. So this is now the total cost. So at this point, when we have the total cost now, it is at this point now that we can now determine the selling price of a particular product or a service. So either you can use markup or a margin. Just put a percentage as a profit, then you add it to the costs, then you are going to have the selling price. So this is how important it is for a business to ascertain or to know the cost of a product or an individual product line, so that you are able to set up the selling price.
Okay.
So unless there is a question.
No progress.
Okay. Okay, so when you are absorbing the overheads into the individual product lines, we have what we call the basis. So we need to have a basis. So you can either use direct labor hours as basis. You can also use machine hours, direct material costs, prime cost, or volume of the product. So even in the exam, it will depend. The examiner will tell you the basis which you are supposed to use to absorb the overheads. Yeah, so if you are using direct labor hours, it means what we are going to have as a rate is going to be called overhead per labor hour. Then if it's machine, overhead per machine hour. If it's direct material costs, it will be usually here, it will be just a percentage. So you'll be given a percentage. So just use that percent. If it is 20%, they will tell you that we are absorbing the overheads using direct material costs at 20%. So we'll be using that 20%. 20% of the direct costs, that will be the overhead absorption rate that you use to absorb or to allocate the overheads into the individual product lines. Sometimes it will be a prime cost. Sometimes the basis will be on the volume of a product. So if it's volume, then you are going to have that cost per product per unit. Okay. Okay, so we have got this example. Chikanda Limited is a manufacturing company that manufactures chikanda for sale to UNILAS students. The company pays a fixed rental per annum of 24,000 and variable unit cost of 2 kwacha per piece. If the budget for 2019 is to produce and sell 48,000 pieces of chikanda, calculate the unit cost of 1 piece of chikanda using absorption costing. The fixed rental costs are absorbed using budgeted number of pieces for the 2019. Yeah, so this is a very good example that we can use. Okay. So we can do this. Just open the okay, so the question is asking us to come up with the costs of producing one chikanda. So we need first of all to identify the variable costs. We need to know the variable costs. When we establish the variable cost, we also need to know, since the question is using absorption method, costing method. So meaning that you also need to know the fixed cost or let me just say the overheads. Okay.
The network has started again.
Hello? Hello?
The network has started again.
Oh, let's hope it will not.
It's starting sometime.
Okay.
Yeah, you are clear now.
Okay. Okay. So we need to also establish the fixed cost or the overheads that we need to absorb into the product line. So I think from the information that we are given, we are told that the total production or the annual units, is it the annual units that we need to produce? It's 24,000. Then we have a fixed cost that we have to pay. So this fixed cost that we have to pay is called the rent. Let me just say rent. So this is a fixed cost. Rentals. So according to the question, we are supposed to pay, let me just check. Oh, I've done it opposite. So the number of pieces that we are supposed to produce and sell is 48,000. Then the rental that we are paying is 24,000. Okay. Okay, so we'll do this. So this is. So 48,000 units, then we are supposed to pay the rent whether we produce 48,000 or less or more. This money has to be paid because it's a rental, it is fixed. Then we are also told that a variable unit cost is 2 kwacha per piece. So the variable cost per unit is 2 kwacha. So this is the information that we are given. So we want to know the cost or the total cost for producing 1 unit. So we start with fee. Okay, so we are calculating the unit. The total, let me say the total. The total cost per unit. So as usual, we have to start with the direct costs or the variable cost. So the direct cost or the variable cost that we have, according to the information, we have 2 kwacha. So variable cost, per unit it's already given as 2 kwacha. So we put 2 kwacha here. So now, since we know that these are the prime costs that you need to incur in order to produce 1 unit. What about the fixed? How are we going to allocate the 24,000 to 1 unit that we are producing? That's the question. So we need to know the fixed in form of rent, the fixed costs per unit. So you can do a working here. So how do we calculate the fixed cost per unit? We have the total per annum, I don't know whether it's per annum, and we have the production. So the absorption rate, we call it overhead absorption rate. It's what we want to calculate. Overhead absorption rate. This is HARA. Let me just write properly. So overhead absorption rate is equal to, so O is overhead, A absorption, then R rate. So this is what we want to know, which is going to be the fixed cost per unit here. So how to calculate the overhead absorption rate? It's simply you divide the level of activity into the fixed cost. So we have the fixed cost so the total fixed cost over the level of activity. Okay, so according to the data that we issues. Okay, so I was saying we need to know, first of all, to calculate the level, the overhead activity rate. Yeah, so overhead absorption rate, so overhead absorption rate, which is given by fixed costs over the level of activity. So from the equation, we have the total fixed cost, which is the 24,000. Then we have the level of activity, which is 48,000. So we divide, what do we get? Is it 0.5, huh?
Okay, let me use a calculator.
Okay.
Divide by 0.5, yes.
Yeah, so this is the overhead absorption rate. So meaning that per unit, this is what we are going to be allocating or absorbing to each individual unit that we are producing of Chikanda. So since we know now the fixed overhead per unit, we also know the variable overhead per unit. So we just simply say, so variable cost per unit which is the two kwacha. Then we have also calculated the fixed cost per unit. As 0.5. So we add the two, we are going to have 2 kwacha 0.5. So this is going to be the total cost per unit. So meaning that this is how much it is going to cost us to produce 1 unit. So we have a variable cost and also a fixed cost. We are using absorption costing. So we need to allocate, or we need to absorb the fixed cost per unit also into the product that we are producing. Yeah, let's see if you have answered the question. Is it clear, Mr. Stewart, there?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so the question says fixed rentals are absorbed using budgeted number of shanties. What is the question? Calculate the unit cost of one piece of Chikanda using absorption costing. Yeah, so I think we have answered the question. Yeah, so this is what we are supposed to do.
So absorption cost is higher than the normal price.
Hello? Come again?
So it's meaning it's higher than the normal. It's higher than the normal price.
Okay, so
using the absorption cost.
Yeah, so they don't know the price you are talking about.
Yeah, because the unit, the unit price is 2 kwacha. So there will be 0.5. Okay, it will come.
So there are two, since we are using absorption costing, so there are two costs that you are supposed to to add up together so that we have the total cost per unit. So we have the variable costs per unit. Then we also need to add fixed cost per unit or overhead cost per unit. Then we have the total. So that is if we are using absorption costing method. Then so after we have calculated the way we calculated the 2.5, then we can add a margin.
The variable cost, which is the 2.5.
We add the profit margin, then we have a selling price. That's how we come up with a price.
Okay.
Yeah, so if we are using a marginal costing, the marginal cost was going just to be this one, the 2 kwacha only.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So the marginal cost is lower than the variable absorption cost.
So the marginal cost will be always usually lower than the absorption cost. The cost under absorption will be higher than the marginal. Okay, so we can proceed. We have this another example. A company has total administrative overheads of 100,000 for 2016. The policy of the company is to cover the administrative overheads based on the direct labor costs per annum. If the direct labor costs per annum for 2016 are 80,000, calculate the overheads. Recovery absorption rates. Okay. Yeah, so similarly, we do the same using it's the same formula that we used even in so this is the same formula we use. So total overhead or fixed cost per annum divided by the total labor cost per annum. So this is the labor. It's more or less like the activity. Although it is a cost, it is more or less like the activity level. Then okay, we want to know the percentage that we can use now on what we are given as the labor cost, which is 80,000. So say 100,000, which is the total administrative overheads over 80,000. So if we want to calculate a percentage to convert the absorption rate into a percentage, this is what we are supposed to do. So it's not always that, like the previous example we looked at, it was based on the units, the number of units that we are producing. Let me just take you back there. Have you seen on the basis? So these are the basis. So the examiner can either bring machine hours, direct labor hours, direct material costs, sometimes direct labor cost, like the one we are doing. That example, it is a direct labor cost. Then prime cost or volume, the one we did at first, it was based on the volume of products, because we calculated the 2 kwacha per unit, 2 kwacha, it's 0.5 per unit. So you can either, the examiner will either ask you to use either of these. So like the question that we are looking at, they have used the direct labor cost as a basis. Yeah, so this is what you are.
Okay.
So 100 over 80,000 times percent. So when you multiply this, definitely you will find that you have 125%. So which means that if you like, this is, if we are to convert this into a kwacha or value, it will be 1.1 kwacha to 5. Then it will be added to every 1 kwacha of the direct labor.
Okay.
So meaning that every time you are allocating the overheads in the production, in the products that you are producing, you'll be just multiplying 125 of the direct labor costs. So that will be what you will be absorbing. So this is what it means. Or
Okay.
just divide 100 into that, then you convert it into kwacha value. Okay, we have.
But why is it a negative?
Hello?
Why is it a negative?
This is not a negative. I think it's just a space.
Oh, that's not negative. Huh?
Just a space here.
Oh,
And not a negative.
all right.
Okay, so but this is another interesting example. If during the month of January 2016, the company has incurred the following costs in production of a product, calculate the cost of the product. Okay. So coming from the same example, it's a continuation from the previous example that we are doing. We know now, we know now the basis, which is 125%. So when we want to allocate or to allocate the overheads or cover the overheads, we'll be using 125 as it is there. So we have been given the material costs, which is 15,000. You have been given the direct labor, 20,000. So the solution there, we are saying these are direct variable costs or direct costs. So we have material 15 plus 20,000. Now, how much are we going to allocate or absorb as the overheads? So we are told that the basis, they are using it. It's what including the production cost. The basis is direct labor. So since the basis is direct labor, no wonder we have to multiply 125% of direct labor, which is 20,000. So when you multiply 125% of 20,000, you get 25,000. Is it okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So this 25,000, now you add it to the other other costs. So then you have the total as 60,000. Yeah, so this is how you can use absorption costing to calculate or to come up with the total cost per unit of a product, of a particular product.
Okay.
Yeah, then we have the last accounting, the last cost accounting technique, which is also called activity-based costing. Okay, so this one will just explain it. So we can also call it ABC. So it is an approach to the costing and monitoring of activity which involve tracing resources, resource consumption, and the cost functional output. So just by the name, activity-based costing, so meaning that you come up with costs by looking at the activity, the activities that are driving the cost. So those are the activities that you are supposed to monitor closely. You trace how much they are consuming in terms of the resources. Then at the end of the day, we'll be able to cost the final output. So resources are assigned to activities and activities to cost objects based on the consumption estimates. So you have estimates, consumption estimates. Then the latter utilized cost drivers to attach activity cost to the output. So the cost drivers, those are the activities that drive the cost, or that cause cost that you are incurring in the business. So you're supposed to monitor them. You're supposed to know how much they are consuming, how much resources they are consuming. Then you will be able to cost the final output at the end of the day. Diverse complex manufacturing demands a more accurate approach to cost accounting, to costing, such as ABC, as compared to absorption costing. So we are saying this type of technique, it is very useful where you have a complex manufacturing industry. So a diverse, flexible manufacturing demands a more accurate approach to costing, such as ABC. So ABC is it's an alternative technique to absorption costing. And it is very useful where you have a complex industry, because your target is to look at the activities that are driving the cost, that are making the cost, that are incurring the cost. No wonder we are calling it activity-based costing. ABC process is an alternative technique to absorption costing for fixed costs. So basically here, ABC also, we are using it to absorb or to allocate the fixed costs. So we use it to allocate the fixed costs into production. So apart from absorption costing that we can also use to absorb or to allocate the costs into production, ABC is also useful, we can use it. But the reason why it is more appropriate, it is because we are looking at the activities. For absorption costing, we just allocate anyhow. We don't care whether those activities are affecting the production or are increasing the cost or whatever. We don't care. There we just allocate. But activity-based costing, we are following or we are monitoring the activities that are driving the costs. So that's basically the difference. So here the ABC is more specific compared to absorption costing. Absorption costing, we just allocate whatever overheads that we have, we just allocate them into production. But here we are saying we have to understand the cost drivers. What are the activities that are consuming resources? Then from there, we'll be able to allocate the cost to say, okay, this line or this activity, it is consuming so much. So we'll be able to allocate accurately more accurately compared to absorption costing. Okay, so this is how the process goes when you are using activity-based costing. So the first step you are supposed to do is to identify a distinct overhead cost. So first of all, you need to identify the overhead cost. Number two, you need to identify the activity that causes that overhead cost. So first of all, you identify the cost. For example, in the example that we are looking at, we are the rentals or rent. So that is the overhead cost. We have identified rent as the overhead cost. Number two, then you need to identify the activity that causes the overhead cost. So in terms of rent, what activities are we doing which requires us to pay rent for a particular building? So those are the activities you need to identify. So in ABC terminology, the activity is the cost driver. So that activity, you can also call it the cost driver or the cost causer. Then step number three, you need to work out the costs incurred each time the activity occurs. So you work out the cost incurred each time the activity. So that activity, the moment it occurs, it happens, you are supposed to work out the cost. Then step number four, determine how many units are made for each incidence of the cost causer. This is likely to vary for each type of the unit. Okay, so you can also determine how many units are made for each incidence of the cost causer or cost driver. Although it will not be the same for each product or for each unit. So you find that maybe this time you will spend less. The next time you produce another product, you spend more. The next time you produce, so depending on so it varies. Even a service, the service that you give today or 1 hour ago, it may not be the same service that you give the following. So it will vary like that. Then lastly, you work out the cost that can be traced into each unit produced. So you work out the cost that can be traced. So you have to monitor the activities so that at the end of the day, you are able to work out the cost that can be traced into each unit produced. So sometimes maybe the examiner will just ask you on how to explain these 5 important stages of ABC. So first of all, you need to identify the cost, which is the overhead cost. Then after identifying the cost, you also identify what causes or what drives that cost. Then you calculate the cost per event or per casual event. What is the cost at that event that has just occurred, or that activity that has just occurred? What is the cost? Then lastly, you trace the cost into the unit produced. So you should be able now to trace the cost, the units that you are producing. This is the process under activity-based costing. So I think in your syllabus, it's not very detailed like maybe in accounting, because in accounting, we are even supposed to do some calculation. I don't know if you have ever seen a question on ABC from the past papers.
No.
You have not seen any?
No, I haven't gone much over that. I haven't gone much of the papers.
Okay. Okay, so we have this question. Let's do the question, then I think we'll be home and dry on the absorption and the marginal costing. So the question says, Odd Limited is a manufacturing company. The following information relates to the assembly department for the year 30 June 2012. So this is the assembling department, and these are the costs under the assembling department, the product costs. So we've got number one, direct material costs incurred. So these are costs, these are total costs incurred. Then we have got direct labor incurred, 200,000. Total overhead, factory overhead incurred, 200,000. Then the number of units produced, 15,000. So this is for the year. Then the number of direct hours worked, 50,000. The number of machine hours used, 90,000. So the question is, calculate the unit cost using marginal cost, then absorption cost using different bases below. So for marginal cost, it's very simple and straightforward. So for marginal costs, we are just interested in marginal, variable cost, which is number one and number two. Direct material costs, direct labor incurred. So these are the only costs we are only interested in.
Just direct cost and labor?
Yes. Then for absorption costing, that's where now we have to include also the factory overhead incurred. Okay, so this is what we are going to do. So for A, this is what you need to do. So A, so if you are to use marginal costing technique, okay, so you have one direct material. So the direct material costs is how much?
It's 200.
It's
200,000.
Then direct labor.
Direct labor. No, I've swapped.
Swapped.
Direct material is 400. Direct labor is 200.
Okay, so we start with 200. Okay, so you can add, when we add, you have 600. So this is the total cost, not per unit, but total cost. So the question says, total cost per unit. So we need to convert now these into cost per unit. Okay, so how do we convert this into cost per unit? So meaning that we are going to have, we want the total per unit. So the total cost per unit will be total cost over the level of activity. So if we go to the question, the level of activity is how many units have we supposed to produce? Produced 15,000.
Yes, 15,000.
Yeah. So we have calculated the total cost, which is 600. So it will be 600
600
divided by 15,000. It's giving us how much? How much?
40.
So 40 kwacha per unit. So 40 kwacha per unit. This is the total cost per unit. So if you want if we are using marginal costing method, this will be our total cost per unit. Okay.
Okay.
Then the question is also asking us to use absorption costing using different bases. Okay, so what are the bases given? So we have got direct material cost, direct labor cost, prime cost, and direct labor hours, machine hours. So we start with one. Direct cost per unit as a basis. Yeah, so since it's absorption costing, we are supposed now to work out the overheads. We need to know how much. We have already known the prime cost, or the variable cost, which is direct, and this. So we already have a 40,000. So since we have, 40 kwacha. So since we have already calculated 40 kwacha, it will be just a continuation now. Let's calculate the total factory overhead per unit. Then we add it to the 40 kwacha. Then we have what we are looking. You understanding?
Is it not the 600? We are not.
Yeah, the total, it was 600. Then we divided by the level of activity. So we know that the total variable cost, let me do this. So the total VC per unit, we have already calculated, so there will be no need of calculating it again. It is already calculated as 40 kwacha. So just continue from here. We need now to know the fixed cost per unit. So we add that here. We are going to have the total cost per unit. So we are using absorption costing. So this time we are using absorption. So sure. Costing technique. Okay, so let's calculate we'll do a working this side. Can even do it below here. So let's calculate the fixed cost per unit. So fixed cost per unit is going to be the fixed overheads, fixed overhead cost over the level of activity. Level of activity. From the question, what is the total factory cost? We have was 200. So we have 200. You understand? So we have got 200 as the total factory cost.
Mhm.
Then we are using direct material cost as a basis. Remember, we should not forget. So since we are using direct material as a basis, so here, number one, we are using direct material basis. Direct material cost basis. So we have got the 200. So how do we come up now if the cost or the level of activity, the basis here?
Unit.
Okay, let's go back to the question. Okay, so I want you to remember how we did it. That example we are looking at. We just take you back there. Okay, I want us to come back here. Here. So we are using direct labor as the basis. So how did we calculate the overhead to be recovered? We multiplied okay, let me go back to the previous slide. This one I was looking at this. So we said overheads over the cost times 100%. So this is what we are going to do. It's the formula that we are going to use. So times 100%. So 200 divided by, what is the material cost? Is it also 200, 400, eh?
Material cost is 400.
Yeah. So 400, 10 times 100%. So giving us what percentage?
Just a minute. 100.
About 50%. Yeah. So 50%. So meaning that the factor, I mean the fixed overhead per unit will be so 50% of so 50% of what? Of 200 of 400. The basis is direct labor, direct material cost. So 400. So what is 50% of 400?
It's 200.
So how much?
200.
So it's 200. Okay, so it's 200 in terms of the total. So this is the total factory overheads that we are supposed to absorb here if we are using direct material basis. Now, we want to convert into per unit. So how do we convert it per unit? So we need to divide it by the level of activity. Let me get back to the question. So the level of activity here, it's the number of units that you have produced, 15,000, remember? So 15,000 is
Yes, 15,000.
Yes. So divide by 15,000. So 200 divided by 15,000 is how much?
$13.33.
13.33.
33.
Okay. So this is the factory overheads per unit that we are going to absorb into production using direct material cost basis. So just add this, we are going to have 53.33. Okay, so this is what we are supposed to do using direct material basis. So we can do the other one using, so I'll just do it here. So number 2, let's do the next one. It's the basis. Direct labor cost. Direct labor basis. So same line here, it will be the same 40. Now we need to do the calculation the way we did it here. So let's do the working here. So meaning that the fixed overhead, the factory overhead cost still remains the same, 200. Then we need to divide the level of activity. Then we multiply by 100%. So what is the direct labor cost?
Direct labor.
It's 200.
400.
200.
Labor 200.
Yes. So 200, so meaning that 200 here also times 100%. So what is the percentage?
200 by, is this not 100%? This is not 100%. 200 by 200, divide by 200.
200 times 100, 100%.
100%, yeah.
So meaning that 100% of direct labor cost here of 200 divided by the level of activity, which is 15.
Oh, so 200 divided by 15.
Divided by 15, still giving us the same one.
Yeah, give the same answer,
33.
13.
Oh, it's 13, not 13. So
13.
0.33. So we have the same answer here. Okay. So even prime cost to be the same. So maybe we can now do direct labor hours or machine hours. Okay, these they are the same strategy we are using.
Oh,
Yeah, so let's try now direct labor and direct machine.
okay.
Okay, so for the variable, so we have skipped to number 4. We are using direct labor. labor hours basis. So we have already calculated the variable cost per unit. Still the same at 40. Then we need to know the fixed cost per unit. Fixed overhead cost per unit. Then we are going to have the total cost. Okay, so now are we going to calculate the fixed variable, the fixed overhead absorption rate. Fixed overhead absorption rate is fixed cost, total fixed cost over the level of activity. So the fixed cost is still 200 divide the level of activity. So now the level of activity, we are using labor hours. So we have to use the number of hours that we are using to produce these products in a year. How many hours we are worked? 50,000. So this is the level of activity. If we are this our calculation on labor, direct labor hours worked. 50,000 so looking at how much? Is it 4?
It's 4, yes.
Yeah. So this is the 4 kwacha per unit. So we are going to have a total of 44 kwacha per unit. We can do the same for the last one. Machine, if you are using machine hours. So in the same vein, we have 40. What will be the fixed or absorption rate? Absorption rate, as usual, fixed cost over the level of activity. So the fixed cost is still 200.
So it's almost you are using the same formula.
Yes, the same formula.
All of them.
So what's important is the basis. So you need to understand the question. In the question, you need to know the basis. The examiner will talk about the basis they are using to absorb the overheads. So is it direct material cost? Is it machine hours? Is it direct labor hours? but the formula is the same. Okay, so the level of activity, meaning that since we are using machine hours, we have to use machine hours.
90,000.
90,000. So 90,000 by 90,000. How much? How many?
2.22.
How much?
2.22.
0.22. 2. So we're going to have 42. Okay, so this is how you calculate using machine hours. So these are a bit straightforward.
Yeah, that's straightforward. This.
The one where you will need to calculate the percentage, that's why you have to be careful. Sometimes you'll in the question, you'll be given the percentage. So if you are given the percentage, there is no need of calculating. You just multiply that percentage on the basis that you are using. You know the total cost. Then if the question asks you to find the per unit, they will just divide now the level of activity, which is the number of units produced. Then you are good to go.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is how you.
So I don't know. How busy are you tomorrow?
Tomorrow I'm not busy. So you can agree, then I can post what time we can have at least another 2 hours.
Yeah, maybe in the afternoon, because in the morning I'm waiting for the company which is delivering some materials plot.
Okay. So you can.
Yeah, but or maybe I can call you.
You can call me.
But in the afternoon, it's okay.
Okay. So
yeah, I can still call you if I'm done fast. But in the afternoon, it's okay.
Okay. So like what time from what time from 14 hours going forward?
Or maybe from 14 to 16, or from 15 to 17.
Okay. Okay, let's see. Let's put 15 hours.
The network again, yeah, it has started.
Okay, so let's say 15 hours. We can.
Okay.
Yeah, we can. So I'll share on the group so that others can join us at 15 hours.
Because and in fact, there's even a what? There's even a quiz, yeah, Chad, yeah, what unit list 11, the IRR.
Oh,
The
okay.
NPVs.
And when is it due? We can
It's
maybe
due
we can skip, we can go to that topic. When is it due?
On Monday.
Okay, so we can do that topic tomorrow.
Yeah, we can do it tomorrow. Maybe so we can have time to solve the nine.
Yes, yes. So unit 11. That's under
unit 11, yes.
Okay, so look at unit.
Yes.
In preparation for the quiz.
Right. Okay.
All right, all right. Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.
Okay.